Hi, this is Randy, and in this series of videos, we're going to work on installing OpenVPN on pfSense. These are my notes here for the video, and I want to review some of them with you, and then let's do a couple of hands-on things, and then we'll be ready to move forward with the full installation. So the first thing up here to mention is that OpenVPN is installed by default on pfSense. It's a built-in package. So nothing additional to install for the pfSense, excuse me, for the OpenVPN server. The next thing that I want to point out to you is that for our particular installation, to help you get some keyboard time and experience with OpenVPN, we're going to do an IPv4 only installation of OpenVPN. I know our pfSense boxes are set up for both IPv4 and IPv6. We have connectivity to and from the internet on both, but for the learning and experience with OpenVPN, we're going to start out with IPv4 only, and then optionally later, I believe you'll have the skills you would need to go back in and to add IPv6 support if you should choose to. Okay. We've got some prerequisites here. First one is that in our Azure DNS, we're doing split brain DNS. So in Azure, we need to create, I'm going to ask you to create a, a record, a CNAME record called VPN, and have that point to PF1 for your domain. Next thing I want to ask as a precondition is that we go into pfSense and we go ahead and create at least a couple of user accounts, 2 user accounts besides the default admin account. You may already have one from our earlier video where we looked at how to create a user account. And if you created that one, it was most likely an admin level user. It was probably one for you yourself. This next account, the second account I'd like you to create it as a non-admin user. In other words, we're going to create a user that doesn't have permissions to work on pfSense, but they will have permissions to where they could use the VPN, OpenVPN service running on pfSense. The next thing is that while OpenVPN server itself is a default, there is an optional package which is very helpful called OpenVPN Client Export, and we want to get that installed. And then as part of our testing, we want to enable remote desktop. Remote desktop is not enabled by default on Windows devices, and so we want to go to DC1, Server 1, and Win10 and enable remote desktop with the idea that we can then, from here forward, once we have this installed, we can VPN into our network and then just use remote desktop to work on Server 1, DC1, or Win10. And then also that we could use a web browser over the VPN connection to work on PF1 or RTR. There's another type of client, not remote desktop, that Linux uses. The name escapes me right now. It's real common, but we could also do that. And I'm sorry that I didn't have that in my notes, but like remote desktop is for Windows machines, there's an incredibly common remote desktop service that runs on Linux machines. Okay. Then the rest of the notes get into actual, turn our attention to the installation of OpenVPN. And I've just got an overview here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a wizard, and the wizard will create a certificate authority on our pfSense box. Most of us, I think all of us already have a certificate on our box, but this is different. This is where we're intentionally creating a self-signed certificate. You know, in earlier discussion, we often thought of self-signed certificates as being a negative, that they weren't honored on the internet as to the general public, and therefore they were problematic. But in this case, it's a security plus. We're going to bring up a certificate authority on our pfSense box, and then from that, we're going to create a certificate for our OpenVPN server that is self-signed. We don't want it to be widely acknowledged. We don't want it acknowledged at all outside of the pfSense and our users. We will then use that when we create our certificate, or we create, as I mentioned, a self-signed server certificate. And then when we enable users for VPN, for OpenVPN, we will create a self-signed user certificate that is only good for that user connecting to this box. And while in other contexts that would be a negative, in this context that's a positive. In effect, it gives us multi-factor authentication. So now the user, to establish a VPN connection, needs to know their username, their password, and they have to provide the certificate that was assigned to them from that server. Very, very hard to spoof that. Very, very hard. So it's pretty strong security. When we get into the installation, there's going to be some things that we're going to need to decide. We're going to need to create a tunnel network. And let me draw a picture for you about what a tunnel network is used for. The name is kind of odd, but what it is that when a VPN user comes in through the internet, you don't just drop them off onto the corporate network. You don't do that. They come into the server, in our case PF1, and then what we do is we drop them off into a protected network. We're going to drop them off here. And this is what in my notes was called a tunnel network. What we'll define is we'll define some different network ID. I'm going to use 192.168. I'm going to add 100 to my corpnet. So I'm going to make it 118.0/24. That's going to become my protected network or my tunnel network. And so when a user establishes a VPN connection, they'll be dropped off on that network, and then we'll be able to use firewall rules that would control traffic from my protected network, from the VPN network, to CorpNet and also to DevNet. So that's how VPN works. Okay. So I've got that here. You can see in my notes I've already filled out those values. I just added 100. It just needs to be something that you're not likely to be using anywhere else, and so I just added 100 to mine. Okay, another question we're going to be asked to identify is when the user connects through OpenVPN, what can they get to? What are we going to allow them access to? And we have firewall rules that can be very granular. And we also have two networks. We have CorpNet and DevNet. And so we have to decide, are we going to let VPN users get to both or just to one? In our case, we're going to let them get to both. And you'll see that down here. This is the values that I'll be using when we get to that place during the installation. The next question or decision that we need to make is when a VPN user establishes a VPN connection, what DNS server are we going to ask them to use? Or are we going to configure for them to use? There's really no user interaction here. It's just, well, we create this for them, and I'm specifying that we're going to use our DC1. And by doing that, it then allows them to do name resolution inside of our network. So the user could VPN in, and then they could open the website beta.ak.bobstaco.com, and that should resolve. Or our other website was www.dev. In my case, ak.bobstaco.com, that kind of thing. Okay. Then we get into the installation. Let's take a look at a couple of the prerequisites together, and then we'll quit the video and pick up with the actual installation. So I'm over here on this is Windows 10. Okay, it's my Windows 10 box. Let's first of all just remind ourselves about where we go to enable remote desktop. Okay, I've enabled it already on this machine, and I unchecked this box. That's standard for me. If I don't use remote assistance, and so I unchecked the box, and then the default was this, and I selected this, and it's the same on DC1 and on server 1. Okay, so I've got remote desktop enabled. One of the other prerequisites was to go ahead and create a non-administrator user account. So I come in here to user manager. See, I've got my account that I created. I'm going to add an account here. Okay. You can see that I've done this earlier and just in prep. Now I'm not going to make Bob a member of the administrators group. Not going to do that. And right now I don't have the option to add a certificate to that account. Okay, later you'll see that I will. So I'm just creating the account. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at prerequisites and see what we got here. Okay, Azure DNS, did we look at that yet? Let's go take a quick look at that. Okay, so here in Azure DNS, I've got records for A record and quad A record for PF1. Okay, and those are right off of my notes. Okay, and then down here I've got the alias, the CNAME for that VPN. So a user will be able to type in vpn.ak.bobstocko.com, and then that will resolve to pf1.ak.bobstocko.com, which will then translate to these two records. Now I'd like to test that. I should test that. So I bring up a window here and I use NSLookup. And I'm going to go out to the internet. You notice I'm in lab A right now, and so it's a local. I want to use it from the internet, so I'm going to say server. Let's do 1.1.1.1, the Cloudflare server, and I'm going to ask it now vpn.ak.bobstocko.com. Okay, let's take a look at those. So vpn.ak.bobstocko.com translates to pf1, and there are the two IP addresses. I look at my sheet, my IP address handout sheet, and those are correct. Okay, what else on my notes here or on our prerequisites? I think we might have got it. So we've done Azure DNS. We looked at that. We created our user accounts. We did that. Oh, let's go. We haven't done that. We haven't installed the Open Client Export utility. So to do that, we'll go back then to, again, I know sometimes I jump around in the video and it may not be obvious to you, but what it is I'm back on my Windows 10 machine. I use Windows 10 machine a lot for testing because of where it is in the network. It's like if there's any routing issues, they're likely to show up on Windows 10 first because it's on DevNet. And so we've got DevNet. Whenever I use Windows 10, I'm using DevNet, RTR, and CorpNet, and PF1, and so I often use it. Okay, so I come back up here to my landing page, and I go to System and Package Manager. Okay, my default packages, or they're not default. These are packages I have installed. They're both healthy and good. No updates needed. I go to Available Packages and I type in OpenVPN and I search on that. And here's the OpenVPN client export utility. Very, very handy. I say I want it and I confirm it, and the installation will take off. So while that's installing, let me just go back now and look at, did we cover everything? Yep, we did that. We did that. So how about you on your server? Have you been able to pause the video and go out and do your stuff? Okay, good, good. Well, let's do this. I'm going to end the video here just in a minute, but let's do this. Let's have you go ahead and figure out what you're going to do for these values. Now remember, the tunnel network it's just some network that is not currently supported. And what I did was I took these down here. Here's my CorpNet, and here's my DevNet, and I just added 100. Could I have added 100 to this one? I could have. You can do kind of a lot here, but it just needs to be something that your clients are not likely to ever need to connect to otherwise. And so I picked this number. Can you change it later? Yes, you can. Okay. So you need to figure out what you're going to do there. You need to identify what values you're going to put in for what networks they can connect to. And again, I have a sample here. When we go to enter this, there's not going to be a space there. It's going to actually look like that. And then you also need to decide what DNS server you're going to do. So if you'll get all these prerequisites done, and if you'll get this all squared away, or get these values filled out, then we'll be ready to pick up right here and go through the wizard. The wizard goes pretty fast, but we want to understand what we're doing. Okay, let's go back and check and see if that package installed. It did. Got the green bar across the top, and I've got success down here at the bottom. Okay, and it's now in our list. If we hadn't done so, we'd want to do a backup, which I did. I did a backup. I also did a snapshot in ESXi just so I could revert back and go through it again. Okay, I believe we're done with all of our prerequisites, and we're ready to quit this video and come back and pick up with the actual installation. See, just double checking. I got my Azure, my DNS here. Yeah, we tested that, right? Okay, we're good. So I'll close up this video, and I'll see you in the next video where well, you think you want a heads up on that? Okay. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to come in here and we're going to come down to VPN, and we're just going to click on it, and then we're going to run the wizard. So these are the VPN products that are installed by default, and OpenVPN is the one that we're going to choose. Okay. All right, I'll wrap up this video, and I'll see you in the next one.